everybody, it's T. Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to start our new series, which I'll describe in a couple of minutes. But before we jump into that, Tim White sent over a little diagram, and I'm going to ask him to set the stage. Tell us where this came from and what you're pondering about it.
Yeah, so thank you, T. And this comes from work done by Pat Lencioni, I think it's pronounced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He had this book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team.
Yeah.
And so then he came back with a new product, which is called the 5 Behaviors. And it's those same 5 that you see there on the screen that he used for dysfunction of teams.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just curious, since now he's talking about them as behaviors. I was just curious as to whether or not that would be compatible conversation with the change grid.
Yeah. Well, I think we can do several things with it. The first is we can certainly say, where do these 5, I want to say, situations live on the change grid? So where does trust live? Where does conflict, and they're talking about healthy conflict, obviously. Where does good debate live? Where does commitment live, accountability, et cetera? So I think that each one of these words resides somewhere on the change grid. We can also then figure out whether or not the progression, as he's laid it out here, tracks to tension or drive or ability or challenge or importance. We've got multiple vectors we can look at just to see which one might this resonate with. And then I think the third thing we can certainly do is say, well, let's live in a very practical world where this model already exists. It's already been successfully marketed. It's already been perhaps adopted by some large opportunities for us. How can we go in and position a change grid as the natural follow-up to this particular, approach? So that's 3 things off the top of my head I think we could look at this from. So everybody else, oh, hey, Brian. So everybody else, what do you think about how this might resonate with what we know about tension management?
I think it's interesting that they put trust as the foundation to this pyramid when that probably is the most difficult thing to accomplish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great observation because my thought was very much along those lines. And if I don't get this trust thing in place, well, how does that affect any of those above it?
Right.
Yeah, plus that's the one that you probably, dealing with a lot of intangibles.
Mm-hmm.
So the other, like, results, you have evidence of what something is working or not. But in organizations, they always talk about like soft skills, hard skills kind of a thing. So trust is hard.
Trust is
Because you
very
don't get immediate results from it, and it takes time to actually build that up, but it has to be the foundation.
I would agree. If this isn't in place, well, there still may very well be conflict. In fact, I'll predict there's going to be conflict, but it's going to be, instead of that healthy debate that I think they're talking about here, I think it's going to end up being more interpersonal conflict. Daniel, you got your hand up. What would you like to throw in?
Oh, sure. Yeah. The thing that, as you were talking about it from the very beginning, it looks to me like it's upside down. A.
Yeah.
That the pyramid should be going in the other direction. The order turned upside down too. Trust, the big filter at the top. Right. That in order to raise trust, you have to have accountability, because accountability without trust is childlike.
Right.
Without accountability, I'm sorry.
Yep.
Making those commitments to one another on the basis of accountability and entering into the conflict, figuring out how, I'm going backwards, I see. Entering into the conflict, getting a commitment, the accountability, and results as the output, which to me is at the bottom.
Yeah. I agree with what you've described there and why that's an important thing to be able to say, can we do this in both directions? I also thought it was odd when I looked at the diagram and then I started reading, I thought, well, you're at the top, start at the top. Nope, it's starting at the bottom and working your way up. So I had a little cognitive dissonance there for a moment. Obviously, I'm bright enough to switch it around, but it's still, you go like, but I get, I get where they're trying to go with the whole thing. You guys continue to chat for a moment. The Jets are really active this morning. I need to close my windows one moment. Chat.
Yeah, as I was saying, it was just interesting that he came back with this product offering where he's now labeling and referring to these as behaviors. And so when I thought of it from that perspective, that's what I began to ask, okay, well, how might this work with the change grid? And how could we perhaps create an activity list around 5?
Yeah.
And one of those things that T talk about is the prescriptive, descriptive, and predictive. And I think that's probably what's missing from this. But we're talking about anything with behavior. Behavior is an outcome.
Right.
It's not just, something that you're doing, but it's something who you're being. And I think oftentimes that's where people have difficulty with. So it's like even when they talk about like well-being within organizations, they're almost always trying to change on an individual level, but never change the structure of the organization itself, like policies and different things that impact behavior. So they're not thinking about identity, which actually behavior follows identity. But what are they identified with? Because it's one thing to say, yeah, we're an open door policy, but if they're identified with the manager who just came in a meeting and disclosed something that was discussed, then it's no longer, simply an open door policy, but it's an open door policy that's shut because people don't have the trust in it.
Yeah, and when I think about my work in the DE&I space, several of these do come up as themes in that conversation, particularly when you're talking about trying to create inclusive work environments. And, we're always in those conversations talking about trust. And so, certainly as a foundation, but yeah, when you're trying to have that kind of a conversation where, people are valued for what they bring at the individual level to an organization, that trust thing has been very difficult.
Yeah. Do you know if he has some sort of an instrument that he uses to measure readiness on each of these 5 elements? Is there any kind of a pre-assessment so we can diagnose, is there sufficient trust or what trust issues might be, or is it?
There is an assessment. I've been on his website, and they do use an assessment tool.
Well, obviously, I'd love to see what that assessment looks like.
Right.
But what I can certainly say, if we get nothing else as a way to work with this, is that each one of these 5 behaviors, it's not a behavior, each one of these 5 things could have its own activity list. You could easily create a change grid to just determine how effectively each one of these is currently being done. So I would use that as a natural follow. But again, I'm not familiar with his work, so I don't know. Does he have a whole system for follow up and follow through to correct deficiencies in each of these 5 areas? Or is he just giving us a good feel, description of these and how companies are doing it? And, I've never, I'm not a reader. I haven't read any of his work, so I don't know. Yeah.
About whom are we speaking?
Again,
His name is what is it, Tim?
Patrick Lencioni.
Lencioni?
Yeah, I'll see if I can drop something in the chat.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know who he is. He's written up quite a bit of books.
Well, I know the name, but I don't know anything about him, or what angle is he coming at all this from? And, I don't, well, all I can really do whenever we're doing the merging of brilliance is that we have to look at what we can actually find and say, are we able to at least begin to figure out how this might overlay, if it overlays at all. If it does, great, but if it doesn't, how can we impact this in a more positive way? So I think that I could probably come up with another 5 sub layers underneath this pyramid. Do you know what I mean? Make the pyramid 5 levels higher. And I'm going to tell you, there are things that are far bigger than trust that has to be put in place if you want to have a foundation on which to even start to build trust or have this trust foundation.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. I
mean,
wonder if he did some research on this. This
I'm
might be
sure he
his
did.
own thing because he's known for like organizational health and that kind of thing. Like he's done quite a bit of stuff with the McKinseys of the world with their organizational health division, that kind of, and all of his books have been based on that kind of thing. He's the author of like the 5 dysfunctions of a team, the advantage, working genius, all those kinds of things. So that's kind of his angle that he's always approaching things from.
Yeah,
Well,
well, go
I
ahead.
work with what is called team spirit, and those are, and I've used them in conjunction with team tension management.
Mhm.
And really to build trust, you have to initiate. You have to have some initiation, and every time you go through conflict, you have to go back and reinitiate.
Right.
There has to be a clarity of roles and responsibility, and you need to have celebration. He has nothing in there around celebration, which really concerns me. And letting go. You need to be able to say, we have differences, we're able to move on. And it's all about serving, and he doesn't really share that in any of those. So some of the things are there, but I think he really needs to me, and not having, and I've read the dysfunction thing, which is good. That's just my take.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was just saying 5 isn't enough. Where's number 6 and 7 and 8? So what precedes trust? If we build on what T was just saying there, somewhere there has to be an environment that is supporting it, or there's been enough history of proof of trustability, trustworthiness, whatever. Where does honesty and transparency and authenticity? It just feels to me like something needs to precede this trust. The other, they're just going like, step number 1, trust one another, like it's a item.
Well,
Yeah.
and there's never,
when I
these
saw
are not
when I-
stepping things. These are not steps. They're not stages. That's why I don't like Tuckman's model either. It doesn't really get clear. They're phases. They're
Right.
not stages. You don't go from trust into conflict. And, you have to have these things, I believe, to have a competitive advantage. But to really get there, you have to go through so many other things.
Mhm.
And then you go back sometimes.
You
You know,
sure
you
do.
just don't go through norming and forming. No, forming and norming, and then you go back and forth because you have
Right.
new people coming in and you have to redo it. So
That's
I'm
right.
sorry,
That's
I'll
right.
be quiet.
No. I think you're absolutely right. It's very much a two-way street. And I can see that there is a bit of a logical progression that if we have an environment of trust, then I can move on to, I don't like the word conflict. I think it seems inherently negative. I know he doesn't intend it to be, but this is where healthy debate occurs. The whole point is that from trust, and Tim, you can comment on this when it comes to the DEI space for sure, until I can't really feel comfortable speaking my truth and sharing my positions unless I can trust the people that are around me. And once that debate comes to some sort of conclusion or whatever, I think the implication here is that now we are going to commit to whatever the outcome was of that debate. We're all just going to get behind it, make our commitment. And then we're going to hold ourselves accountable to follow through on that commitment. And if we do that, the results will happen. Where the other way around says, no, we're going to look at our results right now. And let's go backwards and say, where did this fall apart? What didn't happen? Well, where people committed to something else? Is where was the problem with commitment? And then that's going to probably awaken a whole different set of conflict, and that's going to put trust back into jeopardy. So you guys are absolutely right. It's not just a one-way thing. I think these are all happening simultaneously. And I do, obviously, I believe it's project specific or issue specific. So how many people have the luxury of working on only one project or one issue at a time?
Well,
So,
I think about, my work in the area of mediation, and, those cases, when they come to my desk, they're already in conflict.
Yeah.
And oftentimes you can find that they're in conflict because of an absence of trust of one another.
mhm, Yep.
And so, I mean, I've had cases where, a brother and sister, in fact, comes to mind, and you would have thought that they were arch enemies, but
Yep,
there
yep,
was
yep.
no trust, but there was strong conflict there. And so there was no way to get to commitment, accountability, and results without trying to
right.
address those things. But
Mhm.
yes, definitely in the DE&I space, again, that's where we see this having application.
Yep, yep,
Well,
yep.
I,
if I-
yeah.
the question that you began with, T, was how do we take this and come in behind it and
Yeah.
go with the value change grid? And one way is to really change grid out this, as you were
Yep.
suggesting, and then add to it as a next layer. Okay, so that's what we can do with what you've got, but we have even more.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
But wouldn't you do that, or could you do it for um, a survey in terms of that readiness? Because what I would be interested in is what they're currently identified with, right? Because to me, there's difference between engaging people who are simply just interested in something and those who are commitment to the process, their commitment to the long term.
Right. And
So
the change grid would reveal that.
and see, that's why I think it would be good to even start with like, okay, hey, these are some elements of behavior, whatever we want to call
Oh,
them.
you're
Let's see where people are coming in at.
so if you guys think back to when I don't know if you guys all went through a little series we did called The Business of Change. Did you guys go through that one where we really were just saying like, you can set the change grid aside for just a second. Just think about whatever work you're doing that involves changing someone. How do you really turn that into a business? And you guys might remember me saying that there's a big difference between being in the change business and being in the business of change.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh.
so this was one of the things that we really talked about was how can you fit the change grid in? Well, in the business of change, it helps to begin with a needs assessment. And maybe we can do that with a quick walk along the path of self-discovery. But if we really want to take it to its most useful form, I can certainly see how you would create a ChangeWorks pre-training self-assessment sort of thing as a needs assessment, a customization sort of tool, that sort of thing. And so you create an activity list around each one of these. Obviously, if you wanted to use that even before the deal was signed, you'd want to keep the activity list a little shorter. Maybe just do an overview of it, because until they've signed on the dotted line, I don't want you guys investing your time and energy in something, but you could certainly give them 2 or 3 key behaviors from each of these 5 categories and give that to someone as like a little free self-assessment that from there we can now talk about whether or not there's a need for our services. And once you say yes, there's a need for our services, then we're going to put your people through a more in-depth battery of activities focused on whichever have already been revealed as most problematic, or we'll just do a deep dive and do all of them. So I do think you can very effectively position this as a needs assessment. And in doing so, you can create a more not only robust scope of work, but I think a more accurate, a more realistic scope of work where you could say, based on what the change grids look like, you've got a group of people that are way up grid. They don't know how to do this stuff. And you got a group of people who are taking it all for granted. So we need to do something for the upgrade people, and we need to do something for the downgrade people to move people where they need to be. So you don't need one program, you need 2 programs. And maybe you put everybody through both, and maybe we figure out who's in which camp and train them accordingly. And then, certainly to Daniel's point, you can position the change grid very effectively as the logical next step following whatever the training happens to be. So did they go and implement those activities? Can we use the change grid to track any changes in their attitudes, beliefs, behavior, results, performance, whatever? Can we do that? That enables us to use the change grid to put together not only a very useful follow-up strategy, but a whole chain of ongoing services whether it's additional training that they need, or whether it's a ChangeWorks journaling project or individual coaching. You can very effectively, without causing any turbulence around how sacred they hold this model. We don't need to say anything untoward about it at all, even though we've just identified a whole bunch of things. We can say, nope, we can work in harmony with this model just the way that it is. And then I do like the idea that every time you have one of these reflections with them, you could then say, there's something else that the change grid told us. So let me share some additional insights that are outside of this model. And then that would be good. You just don't, if someone holds this model near and dear and they like what you do, they might want to plug you in everywhere, in which case don't mess with this. You know what I mean? So.
Well, and I think, given the adjective map that you have, you could put some of those words under each one of these.
That's right.
And I'll share with you, I'll give it to T, the thing I do with team spirit to look at, is this an advantage or a disadvantage? Where are we? Where is there consonance and where is there dissonance? I don't know if those are my words exactly, but the thing of it is, you can use this and then go to the change grid, because this might assist you in saying, hey, we got to build on trust. And that's a whole thing by itself. Or what's accountability? And that gets into, well, are you sure who does what? And and so you can get into a whole lots of things here that are great. And it goes into process. It goes into performance management, training. It just goes into a whole bunch of things.
Yep. And I think that it is also giving you an opportunity to say to the client that the right way to get things done, to actually make the behaviors change. And training is an important part of that, but it's only a part of that. Okay, you guys know I describe myself as a trainer. You put me in front of an audience for whatever amount of time you're going to give me in front of them, and I know that I'm going to be able to give them knowledge they didn't already have, insights they didn't already have. I'm going to make them aware of things. I'm going to give them some concepts, some principles. I'm going to give them some tools and techniques. Give me enough time, we might even have time to play with those things, so I can give them a little bit of skill, some practice doing it, blah, blah, blah. But once that training program is over and done with, these behaviors have to continue. And if you want the result, well, who's taking care of that part? And I know more often than not, companies are saying, like, well, the managers do that. Do they really? So, but I think it's important for us, particularly as, complete solutions offerers, is say to them, you need to have this reinforced afterwards. It's great to do the training, but be realistic in your expectations of what training will do to someone and do for someone. Beyond that, to T's point, that now the real work begins. The real work.
When I think about trust, I psychological safety,
Yep.
I think there's some great conversation to be had there under that category of trust.
Yeah, I think you're right. What's below trust? What has to be in place before trust even has a chance? And I think that's what you're talking about. There has to be safety. There has to be, whatever that is. Obviously, we haven't named it, but there's something that is. Please do, Daniel.
I put something in the chat to that exactly to each of these elements based on what I used to teach in the corporate world. And trust is about having power, permission, and protection to do what you have to do without fear.
And so that's trust among others, and it's trust about your own role in the organization. So that's great.
Well, right. I mean, and when you fill out a change grid, you're doing it for yourself. Do I have the power to do what I need to do to get my job done? Do I have the permission to make the changes, et cetera, to do what I need to do? Do I have the protection that I'm not going to get fired for doing the right job?
Yep.
So
we-
T, I
And-
think back to master stream, and that you have to have rapport and credibility before you can even think about trust.
Right, right.
Actually.
That's definitely part of it. Trust is not, I've always felt, and maybe I'm wrong, but I've always, people say you have to earn people's trust. I don't really think that's true. I believe that trust, more often than not, is a gift freely given. So
Mhm.
until you give me a reason not to trust you, my tendency is going to be to trust you. At least I would like to think that's the way it works out, because once you lose my trust, what's the likelihood of you ever getting it back ever again?
Low.
Long time.
Low, or if not non-existent. I'll always have that question mark. I'll always have that doubt.
Well,
So
as Stephen Covey would say, there are people that keep plugging into your, giving you credit for the trust, and you build it up and build it up. But it's only one time that if you do something wrong, it takes everything away, and then you got to build it back up, and it takes longer.
it certainly
So
does.
you really need to be able to, when you go into conflict, I mean, conflict means as though I don't like that word particularly, because it doesn't mean that you're letting things on the table. It just means you're still going to have discourse forever.
Right, right.
So
They're
you're not progressing to getting into something that's positive.
Mhm.
The other ones are positive. You have to address withheld communication and criticism and incompletion. You have to have constructive dialogue.
right.
You don't, in conflict, it seems very negative versus
It
positive.
does.
Where's the peace in there?
Right.
So
And
that's where I'm coming from.
I think you're absolutely right, because I think that the reason why we changed, we talked about this, the fundamental stuff, to solve a problem, to seize an opportunity, to satisfy a need. Well, this feels like focusing on problems that people are going to rise instead of talking about the opportunities that we might be able to pursue. So I think that conflict is steering us in the wrong direction, or in only one direction, where there are at least two directions that this could go. We should be able to debate what's the best options for us to do moving forward. you know?
Right.
So
And that's the
when
organizations that get trapped in this idea that something has to go wrong before it goes right, because you do train yourself in that, right? So this
Right.
idea where environment becomes a key factor in the psychological safety that Tim was mentioning. Because like yourself, I always seen trust as something that we give freely, but it is a continuum.
Yep.
So in other words, there's this believability, there's credibility, and those are all deposits that go through not just what people say, but their deeds, words, and actions are all aligned. Because you
Right.
can break that bond, now you're starting to lose some of that dividend value that you built up.
Yeah. Let me add one thing to that, is that trust can be freely given and lost within seconds.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, because there are plenty of times, I'm sure you've all experienced this, where you walk in and you meet a total stranger. I don't care what the situation is, you meet a total stranger, and it all seems perfectly nice on the surface, but something inside of you just says, this is not a person to be trusted. So I think that there's something that's happening very quickly, instinctually. And then we get into the observation of behaviors, the consistency. I mean, that means we trusted the person enough to give them some time to
Right.
sort of, get involved or be around them multiple times, where I'm sure for all of us, there's been times we bump into people and say, well, if I never meet them again, it'll be too soon.
Right. Think about what's processing that, right? From a
Right.
neurobiological perspective, those are afferent neurons,
Yeah,
right?
you
Afferent
smelled
neurons
bad. I mean, that was it.
sensory.
I picked up.
Exactly.
I
And you
picked
pick
up
it
on
up
it.
immediately.
Yeah,
Because that information, anything sensory, we can process immediately.
yeah,
And so it
yep,
takes some time before we think about as to why that is. Could have been an environment, could have been something they're wearing, something they said that triggered it. So really, trust is bringing both of those aspects together,
yeah,
those
yeah,
different neuron capacities together, the sensory, but also the cortex, where we're thinking about things. And so that's why you can lose it immediately, because if you get that feeling that there's something awry there, you
yeah,
start
yep.
going, aha.
Now,
You, I do want to go back to one thing you said, T, and that is, if a company uses this and believes in this model, I think you do need to continue with it, but learn to adapt it to what you need to have done.
Well, I agree. I agree.
And the reason
Yeah,
I had somebody who believed in only what is it? Appreciative
Inquiry, yeah,
Inquiry,
appreciative inquiry.
yeah.
Yep.
yeah, and I said, well, first you really need to teach them to learn how to question and why, give them all the techniques. Well, I wasn't hired because I wanted to give them more, and I mean, I talked about it, but that's what they saw, that's what they wanted, and I could have worked around it, but instead it was though I was right, and I should never have done that, but that's life.
Well, from the business of change perspective, the kind of little guiding principle there is that once we get in the door, we have an opportunity to grow our relationship with them as they grow in their relationship with us. But we got to get in the door, and so that's why sometimes I've just kind of like, if they're all over appreciative inquiry, as much as I desperately want to say to them that model was never intended for problem solving.
Right.
I can't make my mouth not say that.
Oh, it's hard. It's hard. Well, I didn't quite make it, so
Yeah, well, there you go. There you go. But I do know that there's for the bigger training companies, and certainly if Chris was on here, Chris fell into an amazing opportunity with Blanchard. And so he's getting sent around. I mean, he is in a position where they give him far more dates to choose from than he can begin to handle.
Well, that's great.
He's become a very trusted kind of thing. But you got to believe, if you're working with Blanchard, you dare not deviate from whatever is on their curriculum, because I mean, he's a hired presenter, and so really it's when you're being hired more as a performer. I don't want to say that. It's edutainment, but that's it. You're paid. Here's the script. This is what you need to deliver. And I would find that, on the one hand, beautiful from the, well, I'm busy and I'm making money perspective, but I could just feel myself biting my tongue, during every presentation.
Right.
But yeah,
Well, I made too many mistakes, so I just share that.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's absolutely great.
Can I put on did you want me, I'll send you the PDF I have of that model so that maybe you could build it from there, this model.
Yeah.
And whatever. Okay, I'll send it to you, T.
Please.
If you have access to whatever it is that this organization is using for doing their work, their assessments and so forth, there's a plethora of ideas there.
Oh, absolutely. Always opportunities to pursue once we're in the door.
Yeah.
I had a friend long ago. Okay, when I first started off in this business, and again, this is all from the business of change, so I probably shared this with you before, but I was a young guy. I was in my early 20s, and I was thinking like, I gotta find business. I gotta make some money. And so my attitude was that if you give me a topic in 2 weeks, I can have a program for you. And so I did all kinds of very basic sorts of, training programs, like I'm sure a lot of you guys certainly have done, we do what we need to do to get things started. Well, I had a friend who was, pretty much at the same stage I was in, but they decided they were going to stick to their guns. They only did one thing. They did it one way, and that was that. Well, they had a client that approached them and said, we love all the work that you've been doing with us on whatever their main subject happens to be, but we're having a big celebration event for our sales professionals in Bermuda, and we need someone to be able to do a little presentation on team building or something that helps the sales team work better together. And she said, I don't do team building. And I just went, they're taking you to Bermuda. You have 2 months to get a program together. If you know what I mean? Why would you not do that? So guess who went instead? I did. And I did my program, and within a matter of a couple of months, they were asking me to do the work that they had in prior times been using her to do. So it's a very interesting. I of course just said no. You're her client. You work it all out. But yeah. Anyway, that was my thing. It's like we got to get in. Once we're in, we could do all kinds of things. For example, getting back to this particular one for Tim, another issue that I have around this is the assumption that things happen automatically. And so the thought that trust, well, when team members are genuinely transparent and honest with one another, they are able to build vulnerability based trust. What does this they are able to build really mean? It means I've removed the impediments, and so they can go build it. But are they going to build it? What's the work? What's the real activities around all that? Then the next one, engage in conflict around ideas. When there is trust, team members are able to engage in unfiltered, constructive debate of ideas. Okay, but are they doing it? So where's the implementation piece? And so I could do that.
That's where I've always wanted to put in the path of self-discovery in this model.
Yep.
You know,
yeah.
I love what the DEI, is working with this and really going into the questions. If you go through questions, the only way you can get to results and change results is to change the question.
Mm-hmm.
And you really need to look at questions. There are questions around trust. There are questions around conflict. I mean, there are questions in each one of those. And if you build it around questions, you'll be able to see, okay, do they need to be maneuvered up grid, down grid, out grid?
Yep.
All around the grids.
Yep.
That's the beauty of it, and it is good.
Yep. Tim, that's I think all again we've not read this work, so to build on what T was just saying, is there a section inside of the book that tells managers how to move from one of these levels to the next, or how to? I hope there is. I imagine there is. Do you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I've not read this particular book. I read his book on when he used these as just to talk about dysfunctional teams.
Yeah.
But not this new book on behaviors. But to T's comment, the questioning of it, because I would be really curious to know in an organization the perception of those employees around these 5. Because clearly leadership could be thinking something different. But yeah, I'd really be interested in the employee's perspective and their perception.
That's why what T was saying is important, because and T actually referred me to some a book about that. But the way the brain process inquiry is uniquely different than statements, and I can guarantee that is most likely a difference between the questions that management will have and how that's being experienced by people on the ground in the field.
Yeah, well, that's our general.
That be key.
Yep. Questions make tension go up. Statements make tension go down.
Right.
By general rules, I can certainly find plenty of exceptions, but you get the idea. Well, it's because when you ask someone a question, suddenly they're on alert. They assume you're expecting an answer.
Right.
All right, you've got my attention now. I guess it's quiz time. So,
Yeah, because oftentimes when we go into an organization to do the DE&I work, if the organization's leadership is not positioned that session well, you can almost bet that someone is going to raise their hand and say, "Why are we here? Did something happen?"
What triggered this? Yep.
How soon are we going to something else later?
Yeah. Exactly.
Lord, you just got me.
How seriously should I take this?
Yeah. Right. Well, and if you apply this you remember in pride-based leadership, I talk about a cascade credibility collapse. You guys remember that? But it's basically what happens when employees, okay, I won't go through the whole thing, but you probably remember me saying that there comes a point in time where credibility in an organization collapses, and it leaves the employees wondering if they work for a team of crooks or clowns. So do you remember me talking about crooks and clowns?
Yeah.
So and so that's it, because I can't trust anything that's being told to me. And so that's when you hear managers telling their employees, this is what home office wants us to do, but we're going to wait a week before we jump on board just to see if it sticks around, the flavor of the day kind of a thing. These are all, I'm going to say, situations that provide evidence of a lack of trust. And if I'm the employee and I can't trust what my manager says, and my manager says, well, they're just doing what the person above them said, which is what the person above them said, and I'm left to believe they're all a bunch of clowns or they're all a bunch of crooks, and I'm not going to trust anybody ever on anything. And so this cascade credibility collapse ends up being, almost how do I say, if you're going to try to fix that situation, you're going to need to do a clean sweep.
That ends up being a moral wound in the workplace.
Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, Tim, this is hopefully this gave you the answer you were looking for. Was this what you?
Poor guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I wasn't on mute. I am so sorry.
No.
No,
And
no.
I will tell you, Tim, I do not believe this overlays on the change grid. I believe I can find each one of these 5 things in a home place on the change grid. They all live on the change grid, but I don't think it overlays like a layer on the change grid.
Right. But no, it was a great conversation. So thank everyone for that.
Yeah. Turn all these into business. Write him a quick little note that just says you've got at least 20 ideas that can help him improve his results from this model. So follow him along. Become an ambulance chaser of opportunities.
Ooh.
Any place this gets sold, you just need to go right over there. Say, hey, I got the part that comes before and after for each of these things.
Like that.
Yeah. Okay. I will lock this in as a call, because I think it was really interesting. At least you guys were participating, so that told me you found it interesting. So I don't know what to call it though. So Tim, if you could email over to me the gentleman's name again and what he actually calls this model.
Sure.
You might have already done that, and I just took a screenshot of just a small little piece of it. But
I think it's called the 5 behaviors of an effective team.
really,
Yeah.
well,
And they
yeah.
have behaviors.
that team needs at least 6. So because yeah. But nevertheless, send that over so I can give the attribution correctly. And again, I don't think that there's anything about this model that I would have grand issue with. I think it's in the right direction. I don't have any problem with what it says, but I don't think it is as complete as it becomes when you integrate it with everything else we already know about tension management and all the things that come along with that. So yay, it's part of the merging of brilliance. It fits. Thank you very much. But we can help it, I think, in some really dramatic ways.
Pat Lencioni started the Table Group, which is a consulting organization that goes around the world teaching this kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, and here's another thing that I've said this before. I fully recognize that ChangeWorks and MasteryStream and all of our little spin-off subjects around those, like pride-based leadership, et cetera. I think all those are really, really good. I also believe it is a quantity of information that greatly exceeds the capacity that most clients are willing to invest in for their team. We got too much to offer. And so if anything, we need to whittle things down. Meanwhile, there are a lot of models out there that are very straightforward, very simple, like this one. These are easy for an audience to approach. They can find enough value in what the model is actually putting forth that they thought that was worth the price of a book or that was worth some time on a webinar. That's all fine. So I think that simplicity really does sell. But for me, selling something has not been the goal. The goal is to create a complete picture. And I get it. But for some of us, I'd like to thank all of you that are on the call and listening to these recordings. You're people who are like into it to really go like, no, this really does kind of merge everything together, and thinking that rather than declaring something brilliant or not brilliant. We just go, no, there's brilliance in all these things. Let's find it. Let's see how it resonates, and let's see how it helps us, and let's see how we can help it. So to me, that's a lot more fun, and in the long run, a lot more valuable.
Tim
Yeah.
provided a link, which is the 5Behaviors.com, and it's a pretty darn good website for marketing this,
Okay.
the certification.
Oh, I'm
have,
sure.
they're a Wiley brand,
Yeah.
which is which
So
says
they've
a
got-
lot to human resource
Yeah.
people.
They've got good backing behind them. I'm not at all surprised that they offer a certification. That's why I'm going to assume that there is some sort of a diagnostic tool. They use some sort of an assessment. And I hope it's a complete program that's going to give people action steps at the end of it. These are the things you need to do and all that good sort of stuff. But again, I don't know. All right. So let me just take a few minutes to set the stage for what I had originally intended, but we'll start doing this on Thursday if you guys are open to it. There's a reason why for the past few sessions we've been talking about subtleties and nuances on the change grid, and why it's important for us to know primary energies, secondary energies, tertiary energies, and even what's happening as we move from one point to a neighboring point. And hopefully from those sessions we've had, you guys have really understood, experienced, embraced the truth that there are these subtleties and nuances that are significant in their differentiation between neighbors. So that, are you guys there? Did you go like, no, there's a lot of subtlety, innuendo, all that built into this? Yes, no?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So I was doing that because I want to propose to all of you guys a project that I think we can all work on rather effectively together. And that is updating the comprehensive adjective map. And so to update the comprehensive adjective map, we're just going to review the adjective mapping process. And I'm going to give you guys an adjective, and I'm going to ask you to identify what its primary, secondary, and tertiary energy is. And then we're going to find out where that lays on the change grid, how well it resonates with the other adjectives that are currently around it. And we're going to then talk about impact range. So not every adjective is isolated at a coordinate pair. Some of them have very large impact radiuses, and we need to be able to talk about those. So I wanted to take your thoughts to a deeper level around that. Is that interesting to you guys? Do you find?
Very interesting. Sounds like a job for AI.
Well, as you can imagine, I tried to do that, and I will tell you that I have now had, I'm going to say not less than a dozen discussions with ChatGPT 4, and even some of the private sort of new plugins that they have. And I can tell you, it doesn't get it. It does not understand the levels of subtleties and nuance between two given adjectives. So it keeps on using the exact same adjectives over and over. So if I said that bravery exists here and courage exists here, which one has more of a driver energy about it? It really can't wrap its head around that. So, and I'm all right with all that because I can use it for other things like looking up definitions, things like that I can certainly do. And I did ask it to do something else that was kind of fun. So I'll show you that next. But I would like to do that. I think it'd be great for us to, call it the 2024 comprehensive adjective map updated. Here's the contributors who helped to flesh it all out. Our goal has always been to have 10 adjectives at each coordinate pair. So we got lots of adjectives to fill in, and we got some areas where there's just plenty. So some of this I'd like to revisit, some of this I'd like to flesh out, and I am going to draw it again from scratch. So because this was drawn, it was drawn in a piece of software that no longer exists.
Can
Wow.
you can you send us this one, just so that we can look at it again?
Yeah. I have to put it up on Dropbox. It's too big of a document,
Yeah,
but what I will do,
right.
I'll broadcast it to everybody, but it'll be
Okay.
a Dropbox link to play with this. I do like it in PDF format because it's searchable. I can type in any adjective and it'll immediately zoom to where that is on the diagram.
Yeah, I love that part.
Oh, there's a good thing to that, but we want to have kind of a different lookup guide without, one of the things I've been working on while Linda's been going through her recovery, by the way, she's doing much better. I got to tell you, it's been a long haul. Whatever you guys do, you protect your gut biome because if you destroy your gut biome, you got a long haul to go through to get it back to where it was, if you could even do it. So anyway, but I wanted to show you some of the adjectives that I asked ChatGPT to come up with, and it was in a different chat than this one. But I said, rather than just say, give us the 1,200 most commonly used adjectives in American English,
My gosh.
which we can do. I said, no, I'd like to flesh it out so it's a little bit more creative, but let's have a little whimsical kind of little trip. Let's give people more colorful language. And so I asked it to tell me what were the 100 most interesting adjectives that were used in the 1800s that are not commonly used today. And it was interesting. You would get things like gobsmacked, squirrely, stupefied, flummoxed, And so I'm very curious, where does flabbergasted live on the change grid? You guys think that would be, well, I think it's an interesting little exercise, period. But do you think it'd be kind of fun to have a reference tool and somewhere on it you could say, as far as this activity is concerned, you're feeling flabbergasted? I
I've
think
used the word.
yeah, I think it's hysterical. I think that these are great words that we should start using again.
But there's no amazed, there's no stunned.
Yeah, we're stupefied. Where is stupefied?
Actually, isn't that one of the Harry Potter?
Yeah, stupefaction or stupefaction. I forget which the curse is.
Yes, the curses.
Stupefaction. Yeah. So now, but we can look at something like flummoxed. Now, I said, all right, give us a definition, because people have to understand when it comes to adjective mapping that any adjective map is going to be specific to the language and specific to the region in which it's spoken. So that even means that inside of our own culture, inside of our borders, some adjectives may shift to different locations. I'm going to imagine it wouldn't be a severe shift, but there might be subtle shifts that might happen, because I do believe that the energies that we anchor to each of these different adjectives are going to be different depending on who you are, when you were born, how you were raised, where you were raised. I think there's a lot of cultural distinctions that need to be made. And the other thing is, I don't think we could take our adjective map, translate every adjective into Spanish and expect it to be accurate.
No, yeah.
You know what I mean? So different languages, different cultures, different meanings. I'll leave that to other people. I just like to finish a map for standard American English or standard US.
I think even in the English, it would be quite interesting. Like the old English,
Oh yeah.
I learned. I wonder how that will compare with, people today like talk like they text. And
Yeah.
so they shorten words or use these abbreviation, and it creates its own language a lot of times.
It certainly does. Yeah. But again, I would like to think that our adjective map, if it was put in the hands of someone in the UK, or forsooth is good, but I don't think it's an adjective. I think that's
No, he was just saying how we don't communicate well, and I said forsooth.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, these are great words.
We should use Old English. It's great.
Exactly.
I just think that, again, when I'm thinking about how you go about using the adjective map, what I've been working on while Linda's been going through her recovery is I have been working on what I'm calling a field guide a literal handbook that I think has to be in print form for it to work, where someone could quickly look up a coordinate pair, look up an adjective, find all these kinds of things in a field guide kind of a setting. And I would like to think that then if we're using that field guide for our own personal growth, or we're using it with a client, that we can add a little bit of humor into the whole thing. I mean, there's some funny places on the change grid. And not everybody who's down grid is bored and slovenly and all that kind of stuff. They could also be jolly. And so, you know, let's try to make it a little bit more rich in what it does.
Really fun, actually.
Yeah, I think so too. So I don't want it all to be this way, you know. So let 90% of it be, again, the most commonly used adjectives in modern American English. But can we throw in 10% to be interesting, fun, with, you know, little departure?
You know, it's interesting. I was just looking at, like, gobsmacked is not it doesn't give a definition at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it does back here. Sorry, I've scrolled too far forward. Utterly astonished or surprised.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
We're wide open in amazement. Okay.
Got
What do you think the primary energy is of gobsmacked?
Yeah. Primary and
Yeah, it would be outgrid, upgrid, downgrid, ingrid. So driver, expressive, amiable, analytical. I'm gobsmacked.
it's kind of in the
Upgrade.
I think it's upgrade. I think it's expressive. I mean, just
Oh, yeah.
utterly astounded and surprised.
Yeah.
As if one's mouth.
Understand where the word came from, and that is this guy hit by somebody's gob.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Thank you for
You're-
sharing that.
Yes, there's an image we can enjoy. I love
It's
it.
lunchtime too.
Yeah, it is. It certainly is. Where, like, we know incensed would definitely be upgrade because we already know words like angry are up there.
Mhm.
And so it's not going to be all that difficult to say, yeah, but relatively speaking, just how far upgrade is incensed? Is that about as angry as a human being can possibly get? Or is there something that's even angrier than incensed?
Enraged.
Yeah,
In-
enraged. Are those parallel? Are those equal? Which one's stronger? Does one lean a little further out grid, one a little more in grid? You know, it's an interesting little exploration for all of us as we start to really exercise our understanding of these subtleties and nuances.
Well,
Ultimately, it's got to get back to these adjectives.
I think you also have to say, what would a person who's incensed, what would the behaviors be?
Yes.
You know, shaking, you know, spitting at somebody while they,
Right.
you know.
Right. Yeah, if they're incensed, someone's going to
Read
get
that word.
gobsmacked.
A journalist was talking about a politician when I read that word incensed. It's like the politician, I forget the name, but it said he was incensed and made threats and that kind of. So literally, I was trying to picture in my mind, like, okay, well, did he throw a fist? Did he do something?
Well, incensed, you would think would imply you burst into flames.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
something incendiary is going on, but yeah, who knows? We could look up the words. That would be interesting because part of the field guide would be the definitions for each of these adjectives, because we've got several adjectives that could go in multiple places on the change grid depending on the definition. So
Mhm.
the one we talk about more often than not is creative. I know it's creativity, but creative. When we are using when we are being creative upgrid, that's very different than the creativity we find downgrid.
Mhm.
So upgrade, it's creative problem solving. Downgrid, it's you know, creative expression, you know, art form, whatever the case may be.
You know, you had mentioned something about downgrid can be joyful. You know, I think of people in marketing that sometimes you just need to be on the bench
Yeah,
because you've just done so much and put so much effort into one thing and been in the driver's side that
yeah.
to recoup you have to be down into, you know, the apathy part.
You certainly need to be down there. I mean,
You're
when I
late.
think about the perfect Michigan springtime or early summer day, the sky in Michigan is a shade of blue that I've never seen anywhere else.
Mhm.
So there is a depth to the blue of that sky, and you hear the little breeze, and you're laying in a hammock. To me, that is a downgrid joy.
Mhm.
there's a real relaxing but blissful sort of state there, you know, in
Yeah.
talking about, yeah. Anyway, point is, some adjectives fit multiple places, so we need to make sure we provide the definitions for which we're putting there. But anyway, this is what I thought it would be fun to do. We can review it, we can update it, we can expand it, but the goal is for us to finish it.
Yeah.
And,
Cool.
good.
One way to learn the layers too. You know,
well,
about
yeah,
like a Feynman technique where you're engaged in something by not just reading it, but you try to teach it, you write it down, you find your understanding, and that helps to create the mastery. So I think it'd be a fun way to learn the layers, like the
I
underneath
think
the
it
layer.
will be. I absolutely think it will be. And then I also think about, you know, who would use this tool? Certainly, if we already know how to use it in our work with clients. We go to a coordinate pair where they plot it and say, these are some of the things you may be feeling. Which of these words that surround that coordinate pair, which ones of these resonate with you? Which ones match? They don't necessarily all work all times. They don't, but you know, which ones seem to work there? Or if I say to them, well, if you don't want to feel the way you're feeling, what would you like to be feeling? Describe how you'd like to be, you know, operating, living, whatever. And they start giving me adjectives. I can find where those adjectives are on the map as one of the ways of refining the desired situation, or where you know, where's the target location on the change grid for the maneuvers. But
Have you ever thought about putting this on the stack that you usually have for change management?
well, actually, these are slides right out of the presentation, but the
Oh,
problem
all right.
is that we do have to project these to the wall size for people to really be able to read it.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, you got to zoom in more than this, but the way this is set up, we've got one of the sub quadrants is center. So this particular page would be the, well, it's the upgrid area, but it's the downgrid section, also known as the analytical expressive. And I'd like to add that here. It is the upgrid quadrant, it is the downgrid section, but right here, I'd like it to say, this is the analytical expressive. So I want that centered so you can kind of see what's going on around it, you know, but it's got to be big enough to actually be able to see.
Yeah, that's a hard thing.
Yeah. So I mean, you can zoom in, but you know, that's a lot of zooming in. So
ET, going back to the blue sky in Michigan,
yeah.
why would that be downgrid and not in the center? What
Well,
is
it could very well be in the center for a while, but I'm going to fall asleep.
Okay.
So that's where it starts to move down.
Okay.
It's a relaxing sort of thing that someone's doing. We would say that they do. Now, if you can lay there and suddenly become one with the environment, if you're doing it for some sort of a meditative purpose, or realize you're in this moment and might as well leverage it as a meditative thing, then I do believe you're moving to the center of the change grid.
Okay.
But most people laying around in a hammock on a beautiful Michigan day, no, they're asleep in a short while. Right, David?
Yep. Absolutely.
That's the way it
I
is.
wish the weather were like you were describing today.
Well, actually, that's the weather we're having here today. Yay. So, I'm telling you, you got to come and visit the desert in like November, December, January, February. There's a reason we live here, and this is
Here in LA, the sky is baby blue.
yeah. No, it's true. It's true. Although the sky is not as blue here. It just isn't as Michigan. I'm sure it's got something to do with the angles of light hitting the earth and whatever. But Michigan's blue is a very different blue.
Interesting.
I wonder if it echoes off the water and the water echoes off the sky.
You know, and I got to believe it's that whole region, because if I just cross over Lake Michigan and now I'm in where would I be? Wisconsin. I got to believe the sky's the same, you know?
Yeah.
But there's something about the blue of that area. And maybe it is the Great Lakes that are contributing
Is that
to it.
considered Midwest?
Yeah, Michigan would be considered a Midwest state.
Okay.
Yeah,
I have
technically the time zone changes at the western edge of Michigan. You would go from Eastern time zone to the Central time zone. But it's interesting because in Michigan, you can be out during the summer months at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and it's still light enough outside to do stuff because you're right at the edge of that time change.
Interesting.
Yep.
Well, I have the blue sky, but I have a lot of white around me.
Is that right? You got snow you're dealing with?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess if we drove up in the, 2 hours away from here, we could be skiing. So I wonder where the snow starts. If you guys have been here before, you can drive, let's say you're driving up to Flagstaff or Sedona or something. You're going to stay in the desert for probably the first 45 minutes or hour of that trip. And then suddenly you start climbing that mountain. And once you get up to that next plateau, or mesa, as we would call it here, that's when you start seeing the snow along the side of the road, and you don't see the cactus anymore. You see,
It's good skiing there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the state, I don't know if you guys know this, most of the state is not desert. Most of the state is pine forest. But, yeah, the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world is in Arizona.
Wow.
That also means they have, if you drive about 2 hours away from here, there's a place called Pine Top. It's close to the New Mexico border. It's quite at elevation, but you would swear you're up north in Michigan. All the pine trees and log cabins, and they get full-blown snow. And it's really, you just go, is this really Arizona?
Interesting.
Everything. Yeah. Okay, anyway, that's it. So thanks everyone for joining in. Let's play a little bit with adjective mapping on Thursday and see if you guys enjoy it.
Yay.
Thanks everybody. Take care. Bye for now.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Here we go.